It's been really fun getting to know you, and it was fun visiting you on your turf for Out of Big Sur in March. I absolutely fell in love with the Monterey Peninsula. Already trying
That
to plan
wasn't
it
your first time
back.
here, was it?
It was.
Oh, well,
It
you didn't spend
was.
enough time. You got to come back.
Oh, I know.
Yes, I'll show you the
Yeah.
secret spots.
Yes, it was really fun. It was a good mix of all the things that I enjoy photographing, and I just, I'm a big California fan to begin with. But yeah, it was really fun, and it was awesome meeting you and finally getting to know a little bit more about you. So yeah.
Yay. Yay. Well, let's start with telling us a little bit more about who you are and the kind of photography that you do and when you got started. And let's start there.
Okay. So I am not a lifelong photographer. I got a later start into it. So my background is by college degree, I'm a geologist. Following in my dad's footsteps, he too was a geologist and he taught college and high school. And it was something I always had an interest in. But then as soon as I graduated college, I quickly realized, yeah, I don't really want to work for an oil company. I don't want to go get my PhD in this. Like, it's fun, but what else is there? So my other love was animals. So I graduated and then went right into veterinary medicine. I went to school to be a CVT, which is essentially, I guess the most correct way to put it is we're essentially like the PAs in the
Hmm.
human world, like in the vet
Okay.
world. So we're licensed. We work, very closely with the vets. We pretty much do everything from anesthesia, the blood draws, radiology, ultrasounds. We can
So,
even
and
like
then similar to the human world,
right. The only two things we don't do are prescribed drugs or major surgery, but we can do everything else. And in fact, yeah,
okay, got it.
it's pretty fascinating. So I went to school, got my license, and I worked in a clinic for 14 years. Really enjoyed it. Compassion fatigue is a real thing. You work 65, 70-hour work weeks, you're on call on the weekend. That human animal bond is something that's really important and special to me. So it's fun working with people and their animals and getting to witness that. But there is burnout. And at the end of my 14 years, even though I enjoyed it, I had a life change. I got divorced. So I'm originally from Illinois, just a little south of Chicago, out in the country. And my dad had moved to Denver a few years previous. So I thought, you know what, this is a good time to just kind of start over. And I met my current partner, David, by taking one of his photography workshops. So I got into photography while I was teching in the veterinary world. And I was visiting my dad's. My dad and I would do these dad-daughter trips. I got my first camera. It was a Nikon D40. I learned everything I could about it and then went from there. So most of my photography was weekend warrior, hobby based, just based on travels out west. And obviously, due to my love of geology and where my dad lived, Colorado just seemed like the next good move when I did have that life change. So I moved out to Colorado. I met David on one of his workshops as a client. So I like to make the joke that I'm the client that never left. And we started dating. And then he invited me on the road with him to start teaching workshops and help him. So that's where I started in 2016. And yeah, and now here I am. So I've been a professional photographer for about 7 years now. And yeah,
Wow.
yeah. So
Oh,
now
so
we travel around in a travel trailer. We're here. Our home is in Golden, Colorado, which is where I am now. But we also travel almost full time throughout the year in a travel trailer, teaching workshops throughout the American West, and it's been really fun.
well, that all happened pretty quickly then.
It did. It did. And the one thing I'll say is when you're able to kind of turn your hobby into your passion, it is definitely not easy. I didn't just jump into this without a plan. I had a nest egg built up. Because, like they say, for sure, it takes 5 to 6 years before you start, seeing your profit, and you have to put a lot of time and money and effort into it. But yeah, no, it's been fun being able to, be a photographer every day. And it's really helped me figure out who I am as a photographer. It allows me to follow my creative journey. And yeah, I feel like I've come leaps and bounds from where I was even 7 years ago. But, the journey is part of the fun. And it's just been really fun to kind of discover my likes, my so-called style, and still learn because it's a continual learning process. But yeah, so that's how I ended up here.
Well, my hat's off to you. I've been, I don't know, doing this for 20 years and I still feel like I haven't figured a dang thing out.
Oh, I have days like that. I
I
definitely
don't
do not know it all.
I don't know what I'm doing from day to day. But so, well, excuse the next question, but how'd you get so good so quickly? Also took me 20 years to figure out how to compose a photo.
I don't know. David said from the beginning that he could always see something in my work, but I didn't. I just did it for fun. I just enjoyed it. It was the way to kind of quiet my mind, especially when I was still working in the clinic, and it was, kind of
Yeah.
my stress relief. Um, but I think the number one thing that helped was just I was able to throw myself into it every day. So that includes like, a lot of hiking, just, getting to photograph. The teaching too also really helped. Um, but I don't know. I mean, my dad is a photographer. He's very artsy. My mother was also very artsy. She was a music major and an English teacher. But I don't know, there could be some help from the bloodline there. I'm not sure. My dad is or he did underwater photography for quite a while, just personal for himself, but he did really great work. And I too turned into a diver when I turned 12, which back then, I'm dating myself, was the earliest you could get certified. And I quickly worked my way up through rescue diver. Um, I was only one away from my master, but then life got in the way, and I hope to go back to that someday. But
Yeah.
I was a teenager when he did all his underwater stuff, and even though we went diving and snorkeling everywhere, he was like, "Oh, you want to learn this?" And, when you're a snot-nosed teenager, you're like, "I don't want to do this, Dad. Like, I'd rather go do this." And now I kind of look back and I'm like, "Yeah, I should have learned then too." But it all happens, and it's been fun to learn. And underwater photography is something that I hope to get into later this year and just dive into it a little bit more. No pun intended.
Well, we should another time, maybe another session or whatever, have more conversations about that. Behind, in spite of what you see me behind me on the wall, which is a lot of portraits from Kenya, and on either side of that are safari photos. My background is mainly underwater photography.
Yeah,
Um,
you do beautiful work.
Thanks. 25 years ago is when I first had the dumb, not so dumb idea of doing photography kind of full time. But prior to that, I had aspirations of doing marine biology, more specifically marine mammalogy. And so, yeah, most of my career has been diving underwater. So I get it. I warn you, it's addicting, and I really warn you, it's very expensive.
Oh yeah. Oh, I know.
But we should talk. We should definitely talk more about it. So, another question. I mean, yeah, you got, like I said, you got so good so quickly. I love your work.
Oh, thank
And
you.
probably hanging out with David helped a little bit. But there's more to you. You and Dave. There's been an entity in the world of nature photography for some time. Something called the Nature Photographers Network. It hasn't always been something that you've been affiliated with, but you and David are now. So please tell us a little bit about that and what that is and what you guys do there.
Yeah, so David, well, he's been a member for quite a while. I don't know
We're,
the exact
we're talking
year that
about Dave. I don't know if you mentioned this yet, but
oh
I
yeah.
got David Kingham, who's
Yeah.
another great photographer. We should get him on here someday
We
soon too.
should, yeah. You might see him walk by here soon. Or he
All
already
right.
did. Um, but yeah, so Nature Photographers Network, I want to say it started around like 2000. It goes way back then, and David was a member here, and he lived in Colorado. He's a Colorado native, and he had a bunch of photographer friends, and he met quite a few of them through there. So it was just it was a website, it was a forum, kind of right as the internet was getting a big start. And it's where he met a lot of, other photographers, and they'd schedule meetups to go out and shoot. They'd have, social hours. They would share images on the forum. It was a place to get honest, constructive critiques if you wanted it. Otherwise, it was just a place to share. It's always been just kind of especially as social media kind of blew up around then too,
All right.
a few years later, it's always kind of been like the respite from social media. So, it's especially as social media has gotten so much more like, oh, just about the likes and all this other stuff that can kind of get a little tedious and monotonous. He just always enjoyed that he could go there and have genuine connections, get genuine feedback other than like nice shot, bro, stuff like that.
Right.
And it made him he says, it made him a better photographer. So like all things, it's a lot of technology to keep up with. It wasn't updated as much as it should have been, as things kind of progressed on the internet side and website side. So back in 2018, I believe it was, one of our colleagues said, the guy Jim who owns NPN, he's looking to just kind of like be done with it. So you might want to approach him. And David really wanted to keep it going just because it had been so instrumental in, the beginnings of his photography, and he didn't want to see it completely leave. So we kind of thought about it. We talked to a few people and we purchased it from Jim,
Mhm.
and promised him, we would take good care of it and, keep that, that good message and feeling of what NPN has always represented alive and well. And David took it and did a whole overhaul on it just to bring it up to speed with the technology and up to date. We've grown to many, many, many more members than we had in the beginning. And
Mhm.
he's turned it into that. And he recently just started the Nature Vision magazine from NPN.
Mhm.
And yeah, it's been really nice. And
So you got your own magazine going too there, and that's a
no,
quarterly online thing.
it is. Yep.
Mhm.
Yep. Focused more on like the creative kind of side of photography. I think we have a few interviews in there. I should know more, but it's David's baby and that's what keeps him busy. But yeah, no, so he kind of brought it back to life and it's been going really well. And it's just a great place to connect with other photographers and get, honest, constructive feedback. There's no drama. We're very positive based.
Mhm.
Anytime there's drama, it gets removed quickly. There, we just don't tolerate that because we want it to be a safe space for everybody to, learn and become better photographers. And yeah, it's been really fun to watch it, kind of re-evolve and grow. And, David's taken great pride in bringing it back. And yeah, it's been a fun journey.
Absolutely fantastic. Well, I urge everybody listening to us live and anybody listening to us on the recorded side of things as well to check out the Nature Photographers Network and Jennifer's stuff. And then, of course, was it Visions Magazine? Is that what the title?
Nature Vision, yes.
Excuse me, Nature Visions
Yeah,
as well. All worth your time. God, so many layers there, Jennifer. Well,
I know.
considering this, let's get into some work. This is workflow stuff that we eventually talk about. So let me ask you a few questions
Mhm.
in the realm of photography. Well, what obviously you like animals. Obviously you have a body of work that's animal based, but is that what primarily what you do? Do you like animals? Do you like landscapes? Do you like both? Do you like some underwater? What are your favorite things to photograph? Here's my questions. What are your favorite things to photograph?
Okay.
And the follow-up is, if there was any one place you could choose to go next, where would it be? And what would you photograph there?
Oh, goodness. Um, So wildlife, that's a good question. So wildlife was actually the first motivation for me to get into photography. Um, Thomas Mengelson, I had followed him for a while. We had a few of his prints hanging up in our clinic at work. So I kind of researched him and kind of fell in love with some of the stuff he does and thought, I really, he's inspired me. I want to pick up a camera and kind of document, animals. And then I did that for a little while, but then I quickly just kind of fell in love with just documenting the landscape and kind of documenting or photographing things that were particularly interesting to me. I have a strong tendency to go towards natural abstracts. And a lot of that I think goes back to when I did study as a geologist in school. We did these things called thin sections, which are microscopic, literal, just thin sections of rocks that you look at to identify minerals and kind of, formulate, what caused them to form. And they're very colorful, super macro type things. And then when I did vet med, I was working on my specialty in clinical pathology. So I loved looking at all these things under a microscope. And it dawned on me a few years ago, I thought, gosh, I think this is why I'm maybe tending towards those abstracts and kind of macro work because I enjoyed it in my past careers. And, the natural world is so full of all those amazing details to capture. So I kind of got away from wildlife, focused more on landscapes. And then my wild dolphin project a few years ago kind of turned me back onto wildlife, and especially marine wildlife, since that was something that I've had a love of since I was like 3. And now I kind of call myself, I'm a wildlife photographer if it walks by. I definitely don't go scout for it a lot. You know, when we're in Yellowstone, we're usually teaching landscape photography, but we do take a break if, something cool walks in front of the scene. But yeah, I guess I would pin myself more as just a landscape photographer, but I could also generalize and just say nature. Because, I definitely do have some wildlife in my portfolio. But yeah. And then if I could photograph, that's a tough one. The list grows bigger every day. I
I got
think right now
one.
yeah. Um, it would probably be finally being like getting into the water with humpbacks. That's been on my
Ah,
list for quite a while. I used to do a lot of free diving, wild dolphin diving. Um, and obviously, I would love to get back in the water with my actual camera and do that, but humpbacks are definitely on the list. The bigger whales, I've kind of become fascinated with them the last few years as we've gone out the coast of Southern California and done some
got it.
photography.
Where have
So
you where are you thinking about going for that?
I have no idea. I would love to go to Tonga for many reasons.
Right.
Obviously because of the diving, and obviously you can do that there. I know there are a few other little places that you can do that too, though. I haven't researched it recently, but
Well, that's
yeah.
something else you and I should talk about because I'm probably going to go to Tonga next year. I was
Well,
just when I said I was just in Cia Cortez in Mexico and La Ventana is really what I said. I was also visiting a friend of mine there, a gal named Nadia Ali. I don't know if you've heard
oh
of.
yeah, I do. Yeah.
Yeah, so
Yep.
Nadia, she kind of lives half her time in La Ventana and half her time in Tonga.
Okay.
So we should get her on this show as well.
Yeah.
But hi Nadia, if you're listening out there, I think you might be. But she's a good person to talk to about going out there, and I'm probably going to go next year myself because even though I'm a so-called underwater photographer, I have yet to be in the water with a humpback, which is something I definitely need to get off my bucket list. But cool. Well, do you have? We'd love to see some of your photos and then talk to you a little bit about your approach. Do you have some stuff to show with
Yeah.
us?
Yeah. Let me share my
And
screen.
and everybody, Jennifer is going to show us a little before and after. So before we get into the befores here, where's this from? This is looks like Yellowstone.
Yeah, this is Yellowstone. I don't really have like an order for these, so we can kind of jump around. This is Grand Geyser in Yellowstone National Park. If anyone has not been able to see it in person, I personally feel like it's more impressive than Old Faithful. Nothing to, not to insult Old Faithful, but this one's quite impressive. It just goes up a lot higher. It's a lot more powerful, lasts a lot longer. It's just a fascinating one to watch.
Got it. Now, let me little sidebar here for a second. Let me interrupt and say to the audience out there, if you have any questions at any time, feel free to chime in on the Q&A portion at the bottom of your screen. The chats are not available to us right now, but Q&A is available. You can raise your hand if you like, but Q&A is the best way to kind of ask a question, Jennifer or myself, about the stuff that we're about to talk about here in terms of her approach and what her workflow is. We're, of course, in Lightroom at this point as well, but yeah, feel free to chime in the Q&A. And I'll do my best to field everybody's questions as we go. And if you have one, don't hesitate. I'm monitoring it as we go. So that said, you're a Lightroom user. Are you only a Lightroom user? Tell me about all of the programs that are in your workflow that you use if you use
So
more than Lightroom.
generally, I just use Lightroom and Photoshop. Photoshop, I really only use to do like removal of things. I can't think of the name of the tool right now, but like the clone removal tool, I just find it a little more user friendly than Lightroom. But I know Lightroom is that tool is getting much better as we speak. And then I have got the Tony Kuiper panel. I'll play with the TK panel and usually work with just mid-tone contrast. And that's about it.
What's the
I
TK
like
panel?
it. I'm sorry, what'd you say?
You said the TK panel?
Yeah, Tony Kuiper. David turned me onto it a while ago. I mean, it's
I
a
don't know what
pretty
that is.
powerful, yeah, it's a pretty powerful tool. Um, he just makes, like the luminosity mask portion like so much easier to see. He kind of uses like the zone system, so you can make very targeted adjustments with your, colors, contrast, light, dodge, burn, whatever. I'm not explaining that very well because I'm not a technical person. David makes fun of me because I'm so calculated. It's like, okay, I just do these three things in Photoshop and then get the heck out of there, just because it scares me. So But
Now,
for the most part, I'm Lightroom.
question there. Have you used the luminosity masks and the range masks in Lightroom? And do you find
I've
those?
just started.
Okay.
Yeah, I kind of feel like a newbie learning it all over again. David is so much more, he's better with this stuff. So I have the, ability and, the
Okay,
nice
cool.
that I can, kind of go to him and he's teaching me these things. But yeah, the Lightroom's coming up pretty quick, especially with those range masks. It's really impressive what you can do in here now versus 7 years ago. It's pretty crazy.
Yeah, and I'll say this. I almost never, I mean, I use Photoshop too, but in terms of when I'm developing my files, I 99.9% of the time I just don't use Photoshop anymore because Lightroom does so much.
Yep, every update, it's definitely becoming a less and less thing.
Yes, yes. And then, I mean, the luminosity masks and the color range masks are relatively new, but I mean, I think masks have been out for a little over a year now, and uh, they work amazingly well, and of course, they keep you in the raw environment. But I'll shut up. Keep talking about what you do.
Oh yeah, no. So I'm very easy. I would say overall with my photography, I try to keep things like my own eyes saw them in the field. So camera sensors are amazing, but sometimes they don't always replicate the exact color and the light that our own eyes were seeing. So my whole goal in Lightroom is just to bring that back. And I have about 5 or 6 things that I do in Lightroom. I'm usually in and out and done with an image within 5 or 6 minutes, just because I don't do too much. I'm definitely not, I don't put in skies. I don't, and this is not a judgment on anyone that likes to do that. I mean, no one should ever tell you how to do your art. I just don't do it that way because I don't want to take the time to do it, and I'd rather be out shooting, and I'm not that technical, so yeah, I'm lazy. I like it
Well,
easy.
let me ask this because you're not alone in that sentiment. Do you like sitting around and developing files?
Um, it depends. I just had this conversation with someone else. I kind of have to be in the mood, unless there's
Yeah.
something that I just captured that I'm really excited to share. I like to ruminate. They'll get uploaded to Lightroom and they'll generally just sit there. Um, and I know I just saw Betty's comment. Thanks, Betty. She's so sweet. I like that better. Yes, not lazy, authentic. Uh,
I see that too.
I just
I think she's lazy, Betty.
um, I'm not one that likes to take a bunch of stuff and then immediately put it out. Part of that reason is because I just don't have the time. If you were to see my backlog right now, like I don't even know that you can. Maybe let's see here. Yeah, I can't get to it now, but oh yeah, there's like 28,000 photos that I still need to go through. That's um
Ouch.
thing. Yeah, and I think a lot of that reason is we're traveling constantly.
Yeah,
So
you sound like you don't have a lot of sit down to do this kind of
no, we
time
go from
either.
like one workshop
Yeah.
to the next workshop, which is cool, but the problem is we also photograph for ourselves and collect a lot of images that way, and then we move on to the next spot and they just kind of like sit there. So the winters are usually our downtime where we have time to catch up on that. I still need to catch up on that. Like he's getting so much better at like just getting stuff out there. So he's released like, I don't know, 3 galleries of new images from the last year. And I'm like, I haven't even touched like the first one he released, like when we were in Death Valley. And it's like, yeah, I'll get there someday.
Gotcha.
But yeah, I don't like to spend a ton of time in front of the computer, but I do get on tears where it's like, oh, I kind of, I'm in the mood to process. So I turn on my music and just kind of get in the zone and I'll work through quite a few images. But yeah, lately that time has been few and far between.
Are you also then a stickler about getting it right in camera so you minimize the amount of work you do in post? Um, do you find that the amount of work that you do at post is something that happens relatively quickly? Does it take you 5 minutes an image, 10 minutes an image, 15 minutes an image, or does it vary a lot? What do you think there?
It varies. I would say not, it doesn't vary too much. If I had to put a percent on it, I would say 80% of my stuff I process, I'm done with in about 7 minutes. if I have, because we do a lot of astrophotography, so that gets a little more difficult. So, when you have to blend a foreground with, a night sky, or I'm doing like a stack of a whole bunch of different like star trails, like that takes a little longer. But it's very rare that I do those kinds of shots. I just did like a meteor shower image from Death Valley when we went to the racetrack in December, and that took quite a while because I'm also still learning that. And after that, I was like, yeah, this is why I don't sit here and do this, because like 2 hours had passed and I was frustrated. And I eventually got it right, but I just don't like that. And I know that the processing part is an art for some people, and that's their chance to really, you know, they sit there and they love the dodging, the burning, and this and that. And I do too at times, but for the most part, I try to keep it as I saw it, in the camera, and try to get it as right in the field as I can. But we all know there are certain situations, whether it's high dynamic range or something else happening, that's not always entirely possible. But for the most part, I would say 80% of the time, I'm trying to get it as close as I can in camera to minimize what I have to do in post.
Yeah, that's a percentage I would say that's pretty much aligned with me as well. So that sounds great. I think that ratio shifts a little bit with underwater photography, and especially if I'm doing underwater photography where I'm using strobes, because things in
Oh,
that
yeah.
realm are moving around a lot and lighting is challenging and things are difficult. So just, I would say generally speaking, with my underwater photography, I'm doing a little bit more redirecting of light and dodging and burning in post than I would when,
Yeah,
especially with like a landscape. You have so much time to sit there and make things just right, and you just
right.
don't have, you have a lot less time with wildlife. It's about getting the moment, and a lot less still with the underwater stuff. But that
Oh,
ratio
yeah.
sounds good to me, and I'm with you on that. I tend to follow the let's do everything in our power to get it right in camera to minimize the kind of stuff that we have to do in post. And even in a raw environment where we have a non-destructive environment that we're working in. Of course, non-destructive is a relative term, but I mean, really, truly non-destructive, like in the Lightroom develop module, not necessarily working in layers in Photoshop, where if we're still uh, editing, and or I should say correcting mistakes made or correcting imperfections be in the photo because of lighting or things out of place, elements that need to be moved around, it will have its toll on the
Hmm.
image. So I'm all with you on getting it right in camera. That said, why don't you show us kind of, I know you set aside a bunch of images. Why don't you just start going through them? If you have some before
Yeah.
and afters, talk a
So,
little bit about the images themselves, and I'll ask some more questions about
yeah.
your workflow and your approach.
So here's the raw image of that image that I
I
just
wonder
shared
if you could
here.
full
Do
screen it.
full screen.
There you go.
All right. Um, I lost you, but I know you're still there.
I'm less important, but thanks.
All right. So yeah, so this is the raw image. And this is a good one to share because, a lot of people always think, and especially a lot of my students, they say, well, you've been doing this so long, you probably get everything right. And I absolutely do not. Um, I still get excited when things are going fast. I say that I'm a slower photographer. And that's true most of the time. But in moments like this, when something's happening really quickly, I tend to get stressed and I'm like, oh my God, what am I going to do? I'm going to miss it. So we all have that. So this particular example, we are working on a photography guidebook to Yellowstone National Park. It should hopefully be out in the next 2 years. We just finished our 6 years of like research and taking photos and spending months and months and months in the park, gathering all our data. And this was one of the nights. There was a clearing storm. We knew Grand was going to be going off. We needed some photos of Grand, and we had sat at this geyser, gosh, I mean, probably in total like 15 hours over the last 6 years. It's a predictable one, but it has a very large window of uncertainty. So you usually end up sitting there for a few hours
Hmm.
until it goes off. So we had tried and tried and tried. And while we had some nice like documentary pictures, we were kind of looking, let's capture something, moodier, let's just try to show what it looks like in the weather. And um, so we saw that, there was a storm coming and we knew it would be clearing and Grand was supposed to go off. We were in the window. Um, and so we said, well, let's go sit there. So we ended up sitting there. We got dumped on. Another little storm kind of developed while we were sitting there, and we had our raincoats and we sat it out because we were like, it's going to go off. The storm is going to be clearing. We're going to have this light. Like, we just cannot walk away from this. Otherwise, we're going to look back, see something happening, and go, oh my God, we should have stayed. So we got absolutely soaked, and it started like the storm did clear. We got some gap light, and this is a tad underexposed, but I was in a hurry and not really paying attention to my settings just because everything happened so fast. But then all of a sudden, a double rainbow appeared, and we're waiting and we're waiting, and I'm like, oh my God, this would be like completely perfect if it went off right now. But you just don't know. So we were prepared, and then all of a sudden it just blew, and it happened just like we thought it would. We had gap light, we had nice light illuminating the geyser, but I struggled for the first 10 minutes trying to get like a proper water movement exposure. So some people like their geysers like super quick shutter speed, others like to slow them down a little bit. I'm kind of halfway there. So it took about 100 frames to finally dial in like, what do I want the geyser to look like? And this was it. And Nikons, I love Nikons, but they don't render things as colorful as like the Canons. Like David's got a Canon, he had Fuji before that, and their live views and like, what they took just seemed to be so much more colorful. Nikon is a little more muted. So this was the image, and I did just a few quick adjustments when we got home.
Do you know how to show them side by side?
Yes.
Let's do a side by side.
Oh my gosh, where is it?
I know
Usually
how
it's
to, I know, here's a trick. Select them both.
Oh yeah, that's right. You have to, duh.
Hit
Oh wait,
the,
no,
there you
control.
go.
No, go away. See, yeah, technical. Jennifer's not technical.
Your control key, and then
I
just click
am
on the other.
hitting. Okay, let me go up. Gosh, yeah. Is it highlighting? It is yellow
No,
flag.
so just hold down the control D key and click the other one.
Gosh, I
Or is
am.
it
I
not?
don't know why
Click
that's.
in the thumbnail. I'm
I
gonna
don't.
request remote control in a second.
I know. You see, how embarrassing is this? Is it command? Oh, it's
There it
command.
is.
There
Oh,
we
I'm
go.
sorry. I
No,
mean,
that's okay.
I'm the so-called expert. I'm saying control. Yeah. Now hit the N key and then the L key twice.
Oh,
Yay.
like okay,
Hit
yeah.
the L key one more time. Do you know that?
No.
L's for lights out.
Oh, that's kind of, see, I'm learning something. I
Ooh.
love
And
this.
now hit the L key one more time and then hit the tab key, which will expand the view. The tab key will hide. There you go.
Oh, wow, look at that. Thanks,
Look at that.
Jason.
You're so welcome. So now we can see them side by side. And now a
There,
question
that's
from
better.
Westby Despins. You said at one point a gap light. What is a gap light?
So gap light is a phenomenon that happens when you've got like a clearing storm at sunset, and you've got like that cloud or that like shelf of clouds kind of with the storm, and as the storm kind of starts clearing, you've got that gap in the horizon. And usually when the sun finally drops below the clouds and illuminates, that's what's going on here. So the sun was
Oh,
behind us, illuminating the geyser. You can see it. It was illuminating the trees in the background. Even on the raw
right.
file, you can see the light. So yeah, it's
Oh,
always a fun phenomenon to kind of go out there and see happen.
well, thanks for asking that, Wendy. I didn't know that either.
Yeah.
So,
And you can kind of predict it if you've got a weather app like Windy, WIND, where you
right.
can kind of see the satellite view. And if you can kind of like see the preview of the next hour or so, if you see clouds kind of moving out at sunset, it's always a good opportunity to kind of look for that.
Got it.
But yeah,
So
so
another, sorry, a quick side thing. Betty's asking about those side by side steps again. That's very interesting to others in addition to you, Jennifer. So
yeah, no,
in,
I had
in
learned
short,
something.
here, do this.
Love it.
Hit the L key for me once, Jennifer. Okay. One more, twice more. So I can see the screen. Good.
Oh,
Nope.
God,
Keep
sorry.
doing
There we go.
it. All right. Now on the toolbar there, Betty, and everybody who's listening, on the toolbar there on the left, you have your different viewing options: grid view, loop view, survey view, compare view. I said hit the N key. What the N key does is it puts you in survey view. And all you have to do is select both images that are side by side, or you can select 10 images. And then if you hit the N key and go into survey view, it'll show them side by side next to each other. So hit the N key for us, Jennifer. N is in Nancy.
Yeah, that's what I'm doing.
N is in no problem.
Oh, there's a problem. Okay, N.
It's
I don't know why it's not.
not doing it.
No.
Try going over
Out of
to,
no.
it's so funny that it's not working.
Yeah, let me try my. I have two keyboards. This is my laptop, and then I have an actual keyboard, but yeah, it's not working down there either.
Well, you might, because try hitting the L key twice. You're already in survey mode. That's why it's confusing.
Ah,
It wasn't
okay.
changing for you. So anyway, so that's, and then I hit the L key, Betty, and that, again, L stands for lights out. The quick commands don't always line up. Like the quick command for cropping is R. R is not for crop, but in this case, L for lights out. And that does that. That does it for you. Yes, Steve, why shows you before and after side by side in the develop module.
Hmm.
And more questions coming in, but let's move on. Finish telling us
Yeah.
about this one and then move
Yeah,
on to the
so I
next
did
image.
use a polarizer for the rainbow. I was able to kind of stick one on very quickly. And it was still kind of raining. So I mean, I had at least 280 images of this geyser in the time that it went off. And then I had to go through and kind of pick the view that I liked the best. Almost kind of spraying and praying at the time, just because you want to nail it all. Um, so I did use a polarizer, but then in Lightroom, I really like playing with my black slider. Usually one of the first steps that I'll do is bring my blacks up a bit. There's probably some technical reason why I like that. I really can't say, but usually my blacks and my white slider I really like playing with. I don't touch contrast. I don't do too much with clarity or dehaze. Um, Sometimes in these steamier pictures, I will dehaze just a hair, but it can quickly go south the more you slide that slider all the way over and you start to get funky colors and really grainy shots. Um, but yeah, it was pretty much just kind of like bringing up my blacks. I brought up my shadows a little bit. I do bring my white slider up. You can see I underexposed my raw file just a little bit. I don't know why, but I have a tendency to do that, especially with my Nikon files, because I find in post-processing, by bringing up that white slider, it just instantly brings life to the image and it takes like 2 seconds. The other thing I did here was I did go to my tone curve. I know a lot of people don't like playing with the tone curve or they're not sure what it is and it's kind of overwhelming. That's where I really kind of like to play with my mid-tone contrast by using that tone curve. So I'll bring my lights up a little, my darks down a bit. And just in about a matter of 2 minutes, I came to this shot. I think I might have
Wow.
actually also done a radial filter just on the geyser cone itself or the spray because the light was hitting it. And I wanted to kind of emphasize that a little to give it that spotlight, that kind of spotlight effect.
You can say that again.
Um, I know that's like yeah, the seashell thing. Um, and that's pretty much all I did here. I removed just a few distracting elements down here with the clone tool, and that was pretty much it. But in the raw file, it was a little warm, a little underexposed, and the sky was definitely blue. Just those few sliders. I did not do vibrance. I don't do hue saturation, only in certain instances, but this was pretty straightforward. And this is a good example of just, how you can bring life to an image out of camera very quickly just by, using a few of those sliders.
So question on the, looking at the raw file here, of course, the raw file looks compared to the one that you developed darker. I don't want to use the term underexposed so quickly, but it's darker. And are you doing that to preserve highlights with the water?
I might have been. I wish I could tell you I had a reason. Usually it's either user error in the field or I just happen to, I'm just like, I don't mind. A lot of my mud shots, which I'll show a few mud shots, I do like
Oh.
underexposing them just because I find you do pick up those highlights and I know in processing I can really bring those to life. I generally if it's a more kind of like softer pastel scene, which I've got another one I can show you here, I do like exposing more to the right, actually, a little bit, um, just because I like to get that data to work with instead of pulling out the darks. But this was probably a situation where it was just all happening so fast. I wanted to make sure I caught it. I just happened to underexpose a little bit. And then you can see I also cropped it a bit too, just because I felt, there was a lot of foreground there, and I just felt a crop just kind of brought the viewer's eye into what was going on instead of kind of searching down below there in kind of the dark hole. So I'm a big fan, I'll come out and say it. I crop probably 60% of my images. I do not have a problem with it. Sometimes in the field, you just can't get exactly what you want. Sometimes when I'm in Lightroom, I see these smaller stories happening inside a frame that I go, oh, I think I kind of want to, accentuate that. No, I have no problem cropping. I use a Nikon 7.2 or a Z7 II. I think I have 45 megapixels, so I'm not really bothered. My stuff doesn't go on billboards, so I'm not too worried about losing a few pixels here and there. But yeah, I'm definitely a
That
cropper.
brings up a couple questions. One is you noticed that you shifted from a 2:3 to what might be a 4:3 or 4:5 aspect
Mhm.
ratio.
Yes,
Do you generally care about sticking to a particular aspect ratio or no?
I do. So fun story there. When I first got my website up and going, and David was helping me, this was like 6 years ago. I learned an important lesson because I used to crop willy-nilly, just to whatever I liked my eye to be or to eye to see. And when it came time to putting them on my website and figuring out print ratios, they were a nightmare. And David would be like, "Well, this doesn't even have, I don't even know what I would categorize this as." So ever since then, I stick to predetermined ratios. 4:5 is a favorite I like to work with. I do like 1:1 square, and then good
Hmm.
old just landscape 4:6 or 2:3. And I do like some of my stuff. The 2:3. Sometimes I feel the vertical ones get a little long, which is probably what I felt here. But
Hmm.
lately, I've really enjoyed 4:5. I also like 16:9. I'll work
Hmm.
with that quite a bit. But yeah, I'm not afraid to crop. And now that I learned my lesson, because it was a nightmare going back through all those photos and cropping them into something, so if they went off to print, it would be easy. So yeah, that's a good lesson learned early on. Like, it may be tempting to crop willy-nilly, but if you're planning on printing down the road, definitely stay within those aspect ratios.
Great. Can we
It'll-
see the next two?
What?
Can we see the next pair
Oh,
of images?
yeah. So let's see. Let's move on. Let's do mud. Um, since I'm known for my mud. That's what
Command,
people
not
call
control. I
me.
learned that.
Yeah.
While you're doing that, I want to reply to Steve, who I briefly answered Steve Satsberg's a question or rather comment where he says, why shows the before and after side by side? Yes, I said develop module, Steve, but let me correct myself in there is that the YX icon brings you into compare view, which is another option if you're looking for two images side by side. But anyway, I digress.
Oh yeah.
Mud
No,
photos.
no, that was a good lesson, and I'm glad that we went over that because I even wrote it down over here. I'm like, I gotta remember that. Um, so mud, so Death Valley, I love these natural textures. I know they're not everyone's
Is
cup
this
of tea, but
sorry to interrupt, Jennifer. Is this the before view?
yes, this is the raw, this is unedited. So one reason, I try to get things as right as I can in the field, and that requires a lot of patience. So especially in Death Valley with a lot of my textures, a lot of people think, like, oh, you've got to be photoshopping this color in, and absolutely not. You let nature do the work. So right about an hour before the sun rises and an hour after the sun sets, especially in the desert and especially on these surfaces. So anything like dried mud, salt, sand dunes, even badlands, they're very reflective. So they tend to pick up all that twilight light. If there's a really vivid sunset going on in the sky, they'll pick that up as well. And mud is a great example of this. So this was taken about an hour before sunrise in the desert. And to my eyes, these were blue because they were reflecting that twilight sky. And these were very smooth, very shiny tiles. And you could see here in the raw file, I hope people can see my mouse, there are definitely little areas of highlights. And my eye picked this up a lot better than the camera.
Hmm.
So when I got home, I did bring my exposure down just a bit so I could bring my whites up,
Oh,
and those
beautiful.
blues just pop. And you can see, I would even say they're a little more cyan here in the raw file, but the blues are there. And when I know I have those to work with, this is literally just 2 or 3 sliders in Lightroom. I did not touch vibrance. I did not touch hue. You can see where, the highlights are preserved. So that's, little curls and stuff. And this picture actually is what started my obsession with mud textures.
Oh,
And
it's
you can
really gorgeous.
absolutely,
I
thank
used to
you.
do pottery. This reminds me of raku, if you know what that kind of
Oh,
glazing
yeah,
is. Yeah.
yeah.
It has a real metallic sort of feeling to it, which this does as well. And it's really surprising that you're able to get that feeling from mud as you're
Yes.
putting it. But can we show these side by side in the
Yeah.
DLT? really lovely take on it. Are
Gosh.
you an ETTR gal? Do you know what I mean by that?
No, what does that mean?
Exposed to the right.
Oh, yeah, occasionally I am, for sure.
Occasionally I am. Well,
Yes.
you're touching on something. You're getting it. Command key.
Yeah, there we go. I don't want that, but I don't want those two. We'll get to this one. Okay. So it has all four. So how do I deselect
So
these
command
two?
key and click them again.
Gotcha. Yeah,
There you go.
see?
And then if you hit the L key, select it. Although you're in compare view, so hit the N key. Bingo. See how it flipped them? Okay, cool. Cool. Now we can see them
I'll get it by the end, I promise.
side by side. So, well, you touched on something that made me think of ETTR, and it's something that I when I'm teaching, I preach a lot to those photographers that are just getting into this concept of exposing to the right to get the best quality file that we can when we're doing raw workflow. And what you
Yeah.
said is what you saw versus what you developed, and what you saw is the thing on the right. Even I'll add in there what you experienced in addition to what we saw, because what we experience is an all sense. I won't get too philosophical there, but anyway, what we have on the left in terms of raw files is oftentimes very different. And if you people listening here are following this ETTR, exposed to the right, get as much light in your file as you possibly can to maximize the quality of information that we have on our files, which gives us more developmental latitude. We're in the developmental phase of our workflow. There's something that's going to happen most, if not every single time, and that is your photos aren't going to look very good in the back of your camera. In fact, the photos are going to look not only not very good, but I suggest you not just in part, but completely ignore what's going on with color, completely ignore what's going on with contrast. And that kind of stuff is in our developmental phase of our workflow. When we are normalizing our tones, as it's called, we bring them back in. And that's exactly what Jennifer was speaking about here, of this is what she got with the raw, but then there's what she experienced or what she saw. And when she normalized her tones, brought that back in, and I have to say, brought it back in beautifully. But please continue.
Oh yeah, no, thank you, Jason.
Yeah.
And I should say this exposure over here, I forget how long it was, but it was definitely a longer exposure to collect all that light, especially at twilight where things are still quite dark. Another example I can show of this. Oops, no. Let's go to another. So fresh mud.
Before you go on, though, Rich Brooks is chiming in, and he wanted to see the histograms, which kind of speaks to what I was talking about. Can you open the raw file and the develop module first, and then show the histogram? So yeah, so this file here, Rich, take a look. And then the raw file.
You mean the processed one?
I'm sorry, and then the processed file. Yeah. Cool. Interesting.
Yeah.
Okay.
So yeah.
On to the next ones.
Yeah. So just staying on the subject of mud real quick. I've got
Beautiful. This is raw. That's raw.
yes, this is raw. Oh my gosh. Yeah, see, watch me fumble. Okay, Jason, what am I? Gosh, you guys. Oh, there we go.
N key.
And
then hit the tab key. Tab again. Bingo.
okay. Yeah, I don't know. Yeah, I guess because I was already in that survey view. So raw is on the right here, and this is the final product. So once you start, and I think it's just because I spend so much time in the desert with these textures that I can pick this up. So standing in front of this mud, and this is wet mud, which is why the tones are so nice. It's actually like kind of shiny and reflecting. I could see the blue standing in front of the mud here. And then this was definitely warmer, and you can definitely see this corner is warmer than this, but it all kind of comes with experience. So this is what the camera captured. And again, with just 2 sliders in Lightroom, just really bringing attention to, like, this was in the shade. So this was kind of right against a wall of mud and a wash, and this was more exposed to the light. So the blue is usually shaded and also reflecting the blue sky and the warmer tones. Like the sun was kind of not hitting directly, but this was still being warmed by whatever light was kind of left right before or after the sunset behind the mountains. So just another example that you start seeing these things. And you can see I did some cropping. I cleaned up some spots here. And I know that a lot of people would say, oh, but it's natural. These bothered my eye for some reason, so I did get rid of them. I do leave them in occasionally, but sometimes I just feel like if it's drawing too much attention away from what I wanted to showcase, which was the texture and the ripples and the colors and the light and the highlights, I will get rid of them. I'm not so much I'm definitely not a purist, but I don't do major crazy things. But for my textures, I definitely enjoy doing that. So let me see if I have another example. So one other thing, just on the topic of abstracts that I really like to do, I'll get this.
This is sand or
This is sand, yes. So this is, the image on the left is raw, image on the right is the final product. So this was actually taken in Del Mar, California. It was during a very stormy few days. And every time the waves kind of broke on shore and retreated, they were leaving these crazy patterns just behind in the sand. So it was not sunny, it was cloudy. And this is what I captured in camera. And one thing I enjoy doing with my abstracts, because they are abstract already, there's no context. That's one of the magical things about natural abstracts that I really enjoy. I have no problem flipping them. Now, I could not stand on the other side of this because the waves were continually coming in and I'd be standing on my patterns. So in post-processing, I had no problem saying, well, if I could have stood on the other side, this is what it would have looked like. And they're abstracts, so it's already something, kind of crazy. So I have no problem playing and flipping my abstracts around, especially with textures. And especially if you've got mud or sand ripples, it's amazing. It's almost optical illusion like. If you do flip those, they look completely different. But here I also felt that the photo was a bit more powerful with these coming down from the top rather than the bottom. You definitely could have taken this another direction and they kind of look like flames coming out of the bottom. But my personal affinity to this was that I just enjoyed seeing them in this context.
So cool. Beautiful.
Thank you. And yeah, so here's let's see, here's some sand dunes. Everyone loves sand dunes. Again, Death Valley. You'll notice most of my work is from Yellowstone or Death Valley. So
hit
yeah.
the L key one more time. There you go.
There we go. So what my eye saw, this is right before the sun disappeared behind the mountains at sunset. We were just out on the dunes. It was a bit windy, so you can see like the wispies here. Actually, you know what? I think I grabbed the wrong raw for this one because the wispies aren't as pronounced here, so my bad. But it gets the point across. I mean, it's the same composition pretty much. So this is what I saw. These ridges were illuminated by the setting sun. They're backlit, which is what enticed me. And this composition of symmetry here with this one kind of zigzag here going all the way through, I found this corner was distracting because, there was no way, I think I was at the limit of my zoom lens here, so there was no way to really get rid of that. So I cropped. Again, I have no problem cropping, but it just brings the attention to the lines, the balance, and the symmetry, and just that little kiss of light illuminating the dunes and the backlit sand. So this is a good example. I mean, again, just a few sliders in Lightroom, not doing anything crazy, and this is what it really looked like to my eye. So yeah.
That was the shift that you just did, though, conceptually, meaning like the corner was not what was most interesting to you about the composition, but the lines. And then and then you have the one on the right. You did that in camera. You didn't crop to get to that, right?
I did crop. Yeah, that was a Lightroom crop.
Okay.
Yep.
Well, good. That's an important. Hey, Jennifer, this is an important thing about developing your images.
It is.
Sometimes you don't figure it out until post. And the more I'm a believer in this. I'm such a believer in this. The more one develops, the more they figure out these things that they might not have had the opportunity or wherewithal to figure out in the field, but cropping things and redirecting light and dodging and burning and playing with images for me over the years, because unlike you, I love developing images. I love sitting there and putting the music on and having a little drink and just developing for hours, not only my stuff, but other people's stuff. I've always been a nerd in this realm. And I feel like it's always made me a better photographer because it does. And I feel the same way about printing, not to get into a whole
Oh
printing
yeah.
diatribe about this, but I'm a firm believer in photographers that don't print can't evolve in their craft. We see things when we develop and we see things when we print that allows us to get a feedback loop on what we're doing technically that we don't get otherwise. But
Totally agree.
I digress. Um, Beautiful image and the crop is dead on. Love it.
Yeah, and I don't follow, I'm sure this won't surprise many people. I keep we all know about the rules of, composition. I keep them in the back of my head. They're definitely something that's beneficial to learn. I also study a lot of landscape painters. There are definitely things to kind of study outside of photography to kind of help define your eye and kind of, get you more focused on what you enjoy doing or a style. But, I don't even know where I was going with that. I had a good point to make and it just totally poof left.
Oof.
What was I gonna say?
Well, while you're
Oh,
thinking, it reminded me of one of the better Ansel quotes. There are no rules to good photographs. There are only
yeah,
good photographs.
that's where I was going. Thank you.
Oh, good. Well, that worked
Yeah,
out.
no, it brought me back to, yeah, I was talking about the rules. So I like to break the rules. I like to keep them in
Yeah.
the back of my head because they definitely do serve a purpose, but I'm not gonna let them dictate what I photograph. So a lot of people here, while the composition works, some people might say, well, you centered that, highlighted ridge, and yeah, I did. Sometimes I want to bring attention to that one aspect. A lot of my dolphin photos, they are definitely centered and, and that's fine with me. Some of them I don't need to elongate to give them space to kind of swim through the frame because there's that one moment in time that I'm trying to capture. So yeah, I just wanted to say a quick little thing on that. I could talk about that for hours, but yeah. Getting to some landscape stuff. So this is Yellowstone National Park.
Hmm.
Here's the raw on the left, the edited one on the right. This was an overcast day. A lot of these features are really nice to photograph when you've got overcast skies. The colors pop. There was a little bit of sunlight just barely hitting this mountain range back here. It's hard to see on the raw file, but I just really enjoyed this little scene. This is an area that constantly changes. It doesn't look like this anymore. Maybe it'll look like that again someday, but it's a very blue-green pool. And here, while you can pick up the greens in the raw file, to my eye, they were just a lot more pastel and colorful. So I did do some cleanup. I cropped in a bit. I got rid of some distractions. I know my window's over here. Let me just move that out of the way. I don't know where. I got rid of this random tree branch in the corner and this black kind of deposit here. I cropped out of it a bit, and then I also think I ended up cloning it out of this, corner a bit, just because it was distracting and it took away from the scene. But this is another example of where I would, try to photograph more to the right to kind of preserve those details, just
Yep.
keep it very soft. And I think this is actually, well, a lot of us, you can kind of see, I actually added some haze back in because it was steamy. You can kind of see here these background trees are a little more clear in this one. And again, this is complete personal preference. But when I was done with it, I just said, you know what? You can also take that dehaze slider and go the opposite way. Same thing with clarity, just a hair if you want to bring back that in or bring that back in. For foggy days, it's really nice to use,
Right.
especially, because fog simplifies everything. So it's even more fun to simplify it further if you do want to make it just a little more atmospheric. But yeah, it's just another
And
example of.
were you experiencing also noticing a really nice contrast in color from, the warm to the cool, the top to the bottom of the frame? Were you experiencing
Mhm.
that as well?
Yes, yeah. So the sun was dipping in and out, and it was a lot more prominent than you see here in the raw files. So I wanted to bring that back to life. And warm, cool contrasts are something that I really enjoy working with. You'll see it in a lot of my work. I don't know why I'm just so drawn to them.
So I have a question looking at this screen here, and Kathy, Esther asked this question, and I was thinking this too. You have a white background behind your image.
Oh yeah.
Why is that?
So I used to process with like a black background, whatever naturally comes with Lightroom, when you first open it up and Photoshop. And I find there's a reason because my website is white too. I find
Mm.
to my eye, processing on a white, or even if this is too much for you, you can do light gray background, keeps my colors and contrasts more true when I go to print. Because when you process like with a black screen on the background, some of us are turning up our monitors really high to see that. And I just found that when I was processing with that black background, I was over darkening and over brightening things. Because when I would take them to print, I'd go, gosh, that's really not, and I know calibration of the monitor goes into that too. But I just find for me, David does this too. For some reason, it just helps me see my processing better and keeps it more true.
Where do you print?
We used to use Reed Art and Imaging here in Denver. They closed a year or two ago, but we just realized that they've reincarnated themselves in downtown Denver. They're still Reed, but I think other people took over. So we actually need to make an appointment to go back in there with them. But they do wonderful work. We also use Duraplaque out of, I think, Longmont, Colorado. But we did just buy a Canon printer for when we're home, and we have just started diving into the world of making our own prints. So we are learning. Big Sur kind of inspired us. With
Oh
all the
yeah, good, good.
there.
How big is
But
that
yeah,
printer?
um, I should know what kind it is. It didn't come on a pallet. It's one of the more it's the smaller version of like that really nice Canon printer. It's pretty big. Um, if David were here, he could tell you. It's in the
Got
next
it.
room.
Got it.
But yeah.
Cool. Well, hey, I happen to know a guy that runs a really cool print lab. It's called Bradley Print Services.
Yeah, you do
And
too.
if shameless plug here, just thought I'd throw that in there. But no, I
Yeah.
know Reed. Reed's good. They were one of the labs that first started acrylic face mounting
Hmm.
in the country. And yeah, they went yeah, they went through a shutdown and a reopen and stuff like that. But I know exactly who they are and do good work. Uh,
Yeah.
try one of these times. You should try one of the metals that we do here. I'm really proud of them. We do aqueous ink metal printing here.
Yeah.
One last shameless thing, and then I'll move on. But I think you would like it. Uh,
Yeah.
I like it better than acrylic face mounting, and it's half the price. And I say aqueous ink metal printing as opposed to dye sublimation. Most metal prints, I'm sure all of you have seen metal prints done one way or the other, and on with photographs. Most of that is done by way of dye sublimation, which is like an iron-on T-shirt. You transfer using dye inks onto a transfer medium and then heat press it onto the metal.
Hmm.
Aqueous inks have bigger gamuts. We don't transfer, so they have a little bit better detail. And the archivability is said to be much better with aqueous as opposed to dye inks. But
Nice.
but let's go back to what you're, yeah, so white background, interesting. I like that, especially when you said, oh, this is like my website. That kind of resonates with me. I don't tend to do that. I use a gray background because I like looking at just the image, and with projected light that feels more natural to me.
Yeah.
If I want to simulate a paper, I can go into a white mode, but I normally personally don't do that. But this is not a right or wrong thing.
Oh yeah, no, it's all personal
All
preference.
personal, all subjective. Some people do, some people don't. And if it lines up with your website, that makes a lot of sense to me. But either way, I should point out to everybody in the audience, you do have options of seeing this with a white background, a black
Hmm.
background, a dark gray background, a light gray background, and you should cycle through all of them. And Jennifer's showing you right now by holding down the control key and clicking on that space, you can bring up that context menu, which allows you to cycle through the different options. The only suggestion I have is go with what you like, go with what you
Yep.
think is less visually distracting, or in Jennifer's case, go with kind of a workflow that lines up with with what the application of your photography is. In this case, her website.
Hmm.
Let's look at a couple more. We're running out of time
Yeah.
here. I could sit here all day and look at this stuff. Jennifer, your work is beautiful.
Oh, thank you.
Um, but
Um, so this is actually a newer image. This was taken actually just a few weeks ago, with that big aurora storm that we had. Just moving my window down here. So we made the decision, split minute decision, to drive 11 and a half hours north to Yellowstone to witness the aurora because David said, I think it's going to be pretty amazing. And I think we're going to kick ourselves if we stay here and not do anything. So I'm certainly glad we did. So this is the raw file right out of camera here. And I don't know if anyone can pick up on it, but it is super green. And this was my first time experiencing the aurora. So we've seen it in little bursts. Actually, in Yellowstone last fall, we saw a small solar storm, but I have never been to Iceland. I've never been to Alaska. I have never seen like full-blown northern lights. So I was really looking forward to just seeing them this night. And I think, above all, even though I was excited about the photography, it was more about the experience for me. I just wanted to experience it and take it in. The photography kind of came second that night, because first and foremost, I just wanted the experience and I didn't want to stress over if I was, getting this, I just wanted to take it in. But we ended up going to Yellowstone. It paid off massively. David said it was more impressive than anything he's seen in Iceland. It was just one of those nights. It was so awesome that the entire world got to witness this, especially because it was in places where you normally don't see it. But we spent 8 hours out that night after an 11.5 hour drive and just ran around the park to our favorite locations. This requires a hike. It used to be open to the public, but they recently shut it because the geothermals have actually damaged the road so badly they don't want cars on it, but you are still welcome to walk or bike back here. So there were 3 of us. We met up with a friend and we walked back. This is White Dome Geyser. This is on the Firehole Drive. And yeah, it was just an amazing scene. But right out of camera, I mean, the sky was so vibrant green from the lights that the entire landscape just illuminated up to green. So I wanted to keep that in my frame because, that was true to my eyes. I mean, even the steam and the water, the geyser erupting, the green was reflecting off that water. So, I mean, that's not enhanced. That is exactly what it looked like. And I even took my magenta slider just a hair, just to make the landscape not so green. But again, this is sinter, a geyserite. It's the type of, mineral and stone that's produced from these geyser cones. It's very reflective. So that's why you're getting such a green landscape. But it was so bright that we weren't even walking around with headlamps because everything was so bright. So it was very exciting to have my first experience with this in a park that is near and dear to me. And hopefully I'll see it in Alaska or Iceland again someday, but this was more special to me just because it's somewhere where you don't get to experience it often, and it's among my favorite landscape. But this again, just a few tiny little sliders, no added color. I cropped in a bit just because I felt the left was a bit heavy. But yeah, so just again, I get in and out, I just do a little bit of processing. I try to keep it as real to my own eye.
I love it. Jennifer, let's look at one more pair. You choose your favorite of what you have here.
Oh gosh.
Before we ask a couple questions.
Let's see. You know what? We haven't done black and white, so let's do a black and white.
Ooh.
So this is Death Valley. This is the Salt Flats. They had some really cool kind of formations form over the season. But this is a good example. I know a lot of people say black and white photography really only happens, when you've got those super harsh contrasts, it's super bright out. And while that's true, for sure, you can also create black and whites from even something super ordinary and boring. And I don't like using the word boring. I'm not saying this was boring, but it's flat. There wasn't direct sunlight. There wasn't, anything too exciting. We had this beautiful storm going on with Virga over the Funeral Mountain Range here in Death Valley, and we had this interesting salt playa. But when I do black and white, I take it into Lightroom. I just do the black and white conversion, and I do the same thing. Usually I play with my exposure just a hair, but it's the white slider, the black slider, and it's the tone curve sliders that really create a powerful black and white image. Occasionally I'll go into the black and white color channels if I know that I had a pretty strong color of some sort and just kind of fiddle with that. But this took about 2 minutes to get to, and normally someone would look at this and go, I don't think that'd make an interesting black and white, but you still have the tones there. You have the brights, you have the darks. They're there to work with. It's just, how can you bring that up properly? And I cropped a little bit just to get rid of some of the foreground. But yeah, this was a super interesting storm, super dramatic. So don't discount, days where you don't have that super powerful light. David and I have created, really cool black and whites even on rainy days. So yeah, it's just a matter of, just experimenting. And the last thing I'll say is I've gotten to know what these sliders do because you just have to sit there and you have to take the time and just play. That's how you learn. What happens when I do this one? What kind of an effect do I see when I slide this one? And that's probably what's helped me the most, other than, like a few tutorials here and there and kind of reading the Lightroom updates every time they come out with something. It's really just sitting down and playing with these that you really, you learn and you develop tastes and styles, and then you can kind of take that out in the field and know when you shoot something, oh, I can probably bring this up a little in Lightroom, so let me try that. Because it's amazing how the two go back and forth. So you wouldn't think that this would help you in the field because you're sitting in front of a computer, but I have found learning kind of how I like to process things, it does help in the field.
Yes, it absolutely does. And I love what you said about how you developed this one, and your approach sounded very different, and it should be with this one as opposed to a color photo. The thing with color photos for me is all color photos are often very much about color, especially thinking back to the image that you just showed from Yellowstone, and it was a stick on the right hand side of the frame, and it was hazy, and you even added a little haze as you explained to the image, and it was warm on the top and cool on the bottom, but the contrast was very subtle. Really, the top to the bottom had a lot more to do with a shift from warm to cool tonality, as opposed to, well, with this image here, this is, you removed the color. So with this image, you were talking about how you were pushing the boundaries of contrast a little bit more than you would otherwise with a color photograph. And with me, I do that with the black and white photos, because color is removed. It's about texture or tonality or patterns or other things that has nothing to, other things that are just different. So I develop my images very differently, and it sounds like you do that with your black and white
Yeah,
stuff too. So I'm glad we ended on this one.
yeah, no, because I mean,
Yeah.
a lot of people kind of forget too. I mean, black and white is a departure from reality, because we don't see in black and white. I mean, you're already taking something and making it into something that, your vision and what you saw. And I know a lot of people get a little afraid to really push those sliders, especially with black and white, but I don't, because it's already a departure. So I'm just kind of, easing it along into something that, my eyes kind of saw in the field. Because especially with black and white, a lot of people say, I have trouble seeing in black and white. And doing this for a few years, you tend to see images like this on the left. So when I was in the field shooting it, I went black and white, because of those textures, and I could see the tones and the texture in the clouds. So you do eventually kind of learn this stuff. And if you set your camera to kind of see in black and white, which you can set a monochrome setting, that really helps in the field too, especially if you're new to this. And that was something I used to play with as well. But you eventually just kind of learn these things, and you just know in the field, like, oh, I think black and white. Because I think one of my biggest complaints is, people will try to process something in color and go, it's not working, so I'm just going to make it a black and white. I always try to teach, be deliberate about your black and white. Don't let it be something that you just fall back on. Being a more deliberate photographer, just really helps your craft and helps your vision.
Well, cool. Let's open the floor to a few questions. We have one here from Kathy, and I think you spoke to this already a little bit, but let's see if we can pinpoint a little bit more with Kathy's question. That is, how has processing your own images affected your shooting in the field?
That's a good question. Kind of what I just said about the black and white, it's kind of because I know how I process and I kind of have a style with certain images, it's kind of led me to kind of look for certain keys when I'm out shooting in the field, like especially the mud cracks. When I see mud cracks during twilight or sand ripples kind of reflecting a color, I know what I can do in Lightroom to bring those out to get those to what I want to see. So I'd say that's kind of part of that question. It kind of helps my shooting. But honestly, other than like those few little instances, I'm not in the field always thinking about the final product. I shoot foremost just with what's going on in the moment. I'm a very much emotional, kind of expressive photographer. So processing always, well, it gives me a guide sometimes when I'm shooting textures or my abstracts. When I'm in the moment, especially with landscapes, I'm not always thinking right off the bat, like, oh, this is going to be amazing when I process it. I just take the image first and foremost. Um,
Well, that will sit down more and develop more, and that will change. But
Probably.
what is interesting, what's interesting still is that I hear you say time and time again is that you let your experience, you let what you see in the field, you let what is happening, unfolding in front of you guide what you do in the develop module.
I guess I am kind of being like I'm going back and forth. It's just a hard one to pin down because certain situations I am guided by like kind of what I know from post processing, and other situations it's a shoot now, think about it later, just to capture that moment. So I guess I'm kind of 50-50 if I had to narrow it down. And I'm still finding my way. I don't try to box myself into a style, even though people think I have a style, especially with some of my desert images and my Yellowstone. Because I find that when I don't go looking for your style. It usually presents itself naturally and organically as you start to become a better photographer and you process and you put your work out there. But as soon as you start looking for it, you're going to introduce stress, because you're like, oh my God, is this my style? Maybe it's not my style. And I try to remove all stress out of my photography just because it does affect you in the field when you're out shooting. And we're drawn to photography because it's a release for us mostly. A lot of us got into this for the therapeutic benefits of nature. And I don't want to be stressed. And I find that when people box themselves into those thoughts of, oh my God, does this match my style? Because one thing, if you go on my website, while there are styles apparent in certain subjects, on my Instagram feed, you'll see a pastel image with a real high contrast image next to it. I try not to box myself into that because nature presents so many different conditions that I don't want to just be one of those people that's like, well, it's not pastel enough for me, I'm not going to shoot it. Like I am a at-will shooter. I will shoot anything,
Yeah.
especially things that catch my eye. So yeah, I try not to box myself in.
I love that. Let's end on that note right there. A beautiful sentiment. Jennifer, thank you so much for being here, for sharing with us who you are and what you do. Really appreciate it. And I hope you can get out to Monterey so we can do some more stuff out here together.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, we're
Yeah.
definitely going to be back. We'll be back in November,
There you
actually.
are.
Mhm.
I will be around for much of November. So,
Okay,
so let me know for sure.
I will.
Thanks again, everybody, who tuned in today, whether live or are tuning in later by checking out our recording. Thank you so much for being with us. Please come back the first Tuesday of next month. The guest that we'll have is yet to be announced, but we are talking to a lot of people behind the scenes, so it will be somebody quite special. We're narrowing it down to a couple. So please stay tuned. We'll have an announcement for you, hopefully as soon as next week. That said, there is one other thing of business I want to say here before I go. Let me share my screen again and go over to my events underneath this Lightroom developing thing. And again, yes, Lightroom developing workshop, June 29th is Kenya. I haven't announced this in a couple of Lightroom lives, but we had a couple spots opened just recently opened up. So if you have any interest in joining us next January in Kenya, in both the Masai Mara and in Amboseli National Park, amazing places, send me an email and we can send you some material that will tell you a little bit more about what we're going to do, where we're going to go, and what we're going to see. And then we can have a conversation from there if you have any interest. That said, Jennifer, thanks again for joining us. Thank you all for tuning in, and we'll see you guys next time.
Thanks, guys.
Say hi to David.
Yes, I will. Thanks,
Bye,
Jason.
Jennifer. Cheers.